Welcome, everybody. We are back for another installment of Indie Reads Aloud Radio. We are having such a blast with this program. Um, and today, Jennifer Rains is coming back to read for us for a second time. I love having repeat offenders back on the program. I think it's so much fun. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So much fun to have Jennifer here because, as we were just saying in the green room, I'm having a lot of like mesmerizing wonderment. I'm being 6 years old in my head because Jennifer is from Sydney, Australia, and I'm still wrapping my brain around this thing that you're on the other side of the planet.
It's amazing.
It's an amazing thing. So let me tell everybody a little bit about you, Jennifer. Jennifer Rains writes contemporary romance set mainly, but not exclusively, in Australia. Think Malta, Finland, New Zealand, places like that. A dreamer and an optimist, her stories are a delicious cocktail of mutual respect, passion, and loyalty because she still believes in happily ever afters. Don't we all? Happily ever afters are important. Jennifer lives in inner city Sydney, Australia, with the requisite number of partners, that would be 1, and animals, that would be 2. Her desk overlooks a park which nourishes her soul when she raises her head from her keyboard. She gets some of her best ideas during long yin yoga poses or walking anywhere. While Jennifer adores historical romance, she chose to write contemporary romance because she thought that it needed less research. She discovered she may have been wrong about that. And she does all this while holding down a full-time job, which we all know is a remarkable feat. So welcome back, Jennifer, again. Thank you so much for coming back.
I'm really looking forward to sharing grace with you.
Me too, because this is exciting. This is a brand new book for you. This is so much fun. For those of you who heard Jennifer read last time, she read from Taylor's Law. This book is associated with that, but it's not necessarily one that you have to read in order. So if this is your first time hearing Jennifer read, first order of business, go find a book. Second order of business, go back and listen to the episode with Taylor's Law. You're going to enjoy that one as well. So today, she's going to read Grace Under Fire. And before we get started, I want to let everyone know there is a listener advisory for this episode. If you have little ears nearby, you might want to preview this program before you share it with them. This has references to teen suicide, which might be a sensitive topic for some people. So we don't want to trigger anybody. So please just let your little ones be supervised when they listen. Ella Anderson adores her niece. Despite struggling to make ends meet, accepting her dying sister's request to raise Tessa as her own is a no-brainer. That's from Taylor's Law, isn't it?
It is from Taylor's Law.
I just pulled up the wrong show notes. Shame on Diana. That's terrible. That's the first time I've ever done this. And we've done 77 episodes of this program, and that's the first time I've done this.
I'm wondering if the fault's mine because I've only just agreed the blurb with my publisher, and I might not have given it to you.
No fault, no foul. It's fine. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to tell us in your very own words a little bit about what this story is about, and then we'll get it all fixed in the show notes.
Okay. It's deal or no deal as two neighbours confront a new threat while dealing with a past tragedy. So Grace Anderson is an artisan cheesemaker determined to inherit the family farm, and she's expecting to do that in about a decade or so, but her mother's not well, and so suddenly the timeline is shortened and she needs to find the money to buy out the farm.
Okay.
Yeah. Ryan Wilson, her neighbour, left town 10 years ago after his brother's death and vowing not to do attachment to this neighbourhood or to people. But he's returned to get his family farm in order to sell it and move on. They're thrown together. This is hard. This is hard not remembering exactly what I wrote. They're thrown together when someone threatens her purchase of the farm, sabotage occurs, and she calls on him for assistance, and it becomes more than financial assistance.
Oh, this is so much
So
fun.
can she teach him to care, and can he teach her that accepting help is not a loss of independence?
Oh, this is a good story.
Well, I hope so.
See, you've just added a new book to my TBR pile. Thank you so much for that. I have so many books to read. It's not even funny. So thank you so much. And when you are ready, please take the microphone and read aloud for us.
Okay. Grace Under Fire, Chapter 1. To hell with the naysayers and the doubters. She didn't give a tinker's cuss what they thought. Grace Anderson was slowly winning over the town. Next, she planned to charm the valley. It might have taken the Northern New South Wales Field Day Committee a few years to come to the party, but here she was, artisan cheesemaker with her own booth, her own banners, and her own prize-winning products. Grace Anderson's farmhouse cheeses were smack bang in the middle of the exhibition hall, in the middle of the Northern Rivers showground, reaping the benefits of the biggest crowds on record. A single bite of her pale golden cheddar with its hint of sharpness, and people were hooked. Her first experiment in unique cheese, it held prime place in her heart. It had also won more blue ribbons than her soft cheeses, but a few more years and competitions would change that. More than a decade of unrelenting work was starting to pay off. An announcement cut through the buzz of the crowd. The video presentation on the removal of woody weeds and revegetation with local native species will start in 10 minutes. Grace's order book was bulging, and she'd made a few solid business contacts today. She didn't mind the work, and the taste of success was sweet. Shoving her hands in the back pockets of her jeans, she rocked back on her heels and allowed herself a grin. "You look pleased with yourself," her sister Ella said. "I am." Grace leaned across the counter to hug her sister, placing a hand gently on the baby sling housing her 4-month-old nephew, and held on. "Hug me!" The imperious demand from below the counter had Grace backpedaling to come around the side of the booth. Ella had nursed their younger sister, Chrissy, until her death 2 years ago and adopted her daughter. Grace crouched to Tessa's height, and the little girl stepped into her arms. Her niece smelled of vanilla and Ella's soap. Tessa wrapped her sturdy 4-year-old legs around Grace's waist, anchoring herself in place. Grace grinned at her sister. "When did you get here?" "About half an hour ago." "And Jake?" "Seduced by a ride-on mower." Ella nodded in the direction of the pavilion showcasing farm machinery. "Shiny paint, huge wheels, and gargantuan blades. The perfect toy for a hotshot Sydney lawyer who lives in an apartment." "How's the house hunting going?" Normal chit-chat, when her sister's visit this weekend was anything but normal. "We found a bungalow with wide verandas and a large garden." Ella's hand cupped her baby's bottom. "Perfect for the kids. Jake's put in an offer." Fingers crossed. Grace held crossed fingers in front of Tessa, who mimicked her action. "A bit higher than the budget we planned," Ella confessed. "Budgets rarely match dreams. I've fallen for a German curd vat." Grace winced. "Much more than the budget I planned." "Are you hurting?" Tessa caught Grace's chin, turning Grace's face towards her. "Kiss it better?" Grace pointed to her cheek, and the child planted a sloppy kiss. How much longer will you be here? Ella gestured around the hall. A few hours. Packing up will take another hour. I should be back at the farm by 7. Any clues why Mum and Dad called the meeting? Ella's inquiry was laced with concern. You know what they're like. A united team. Grace had never known a time when her parents' love wasn't strong and real, an aura tangible enough to reach out and touch. A family meeting only starts when all the family's present. But Mum's not getting any stronger. She'd borne witness to a mother's steady decline in recent months. Simple household tasks became harder by the day. Her mother thought Grace didn't notice the tricks her mother had adopted to disguise her frailty. Grace gave her the dignity of pretending not to see. She's still struggling from her last bout of pneumonia. Tell me. With 2 words, her sister shouldered some of Grace's burden. She couldn't make the bed by herself. Grace blinked back tears. Yesterday, she'd found her mother sitting on the side of the bed, her fingers caught in the folds of the fitted bottom sheet, trying to push it over the corner of the mattress. Grace had made up some story to explain her arrival, said she needed something only her mother could find. She'd coaxed her mother out of the room, then remade the bed. I think they saw another specialist. Since our call last week, Ella brushed the back of her hand across Grace's cheek. Are you trying to make me cry? Grace sniffed, then winked at Tessa. Another kiss to make it better. The child held Grace's face with both hands and placed a solemn kiss on each cheek. Grace spun in a circle, delighting in Tessa's squeals of joy. I didn't say anything about the bed. Just like you haven't said anything about taking over shopping, the housework and the cooking. Ella pumped Grace for details every time they talked. It's not hard to knock up extra casseroles and soups. They can eat them if they want them. The food disappeared almost as fast as Grace put it in the freezer. They're intelligent people. They must know it can't go on like this. They went to town Thursday morning. Dad asked me to do the afternoon milking, even though they were home. She'd spent a sleepless night parsing out the implication of her father's absence from the shed. She could count on one hand the number of times he'd skipped milking over the years. We'll insist on an answer this time, Ella said firmly. For a family that talks about everything, they've been uncharacteristically close-mouthed about this. Grace taking on more work didn't make a damn bit of difference to her mother's health. Grace nuzzled against Tessa's neck, the little girl's giggles a quiet comfort, smoothing over the tight clumps of anxiety holding Grace's body hostage. Hi, EJ. Grace. The deep male voice, honey and smoke, brought Grace's head up, her antennae on alert. Tessa protested at her firmer grip. Grace hadn't seen him arrive, and with a sister as an audience, couldn't avoid the contact. Ryan Wilson was 6'2" and topped her by a good 4 inches. His broad shoulders were encased in standard dairy country uniform of blue chambray and sleeveless polyfibre jacket. The dark moleskins and battered R.M. Williams boots were another tell of Australian country boy. Ditto with the wide-brimmed akubra perched on his head. Dark reflective sunglasses hid his eyes, but his mouth was set in a straight line above a square jaw. His skin was tanned to a burnished gold, chamois soft for a man who lived his life outdoors. Word was, Ryan Wilson had lived outdoors in the 8 years he'd been absent from the valley. Ryan! Ella's ready smile curved in greeting. Sorry I've missed you my last few visits home. We haven't left the farm. Grace had been avoiding personal encounters with him in the 2 years since he'd been home. Quite a feat, given they were neighbours. His mouth relaxed into a half smile. You've been busy since I last saw you. Meet Tiger. Ella rested her hand on her son's head. Tiger? He was on the move, even in the womb. Ella laughed. His birth certificate says Kit. She pointed at the child in Grace's arms. Tessa's grown a bit. Did you want something? Grace drew herself up to her full height. He had the edge, but she didn't back away. The prickle of awareness was new to her and oddly disoriented. So he turned into a hunk. Just saying hello to all the new stall holders as a member of the field day committee. Ryan dared Grace to object. Doggy, Tessa squealed. Jake continued, asking if there's anything we can do to improve your experience. He could take himself off like he had 10 years ago. Annoyance did battle with basic politeness. I'm fine. On the committee, Ella teased. The Wilson boy made good. A mover and a shaker, he replied ironically. Doggy, Tessa wriggled in Grace's arms, straining to get down. Grace squatted to face the three-legged mixed breed leaning against Ryan, keeping Tessa within the secure circle of her arms. Ryan could have approached Grace at any time during the long day. Instead, he'd used Ella to run interference. His tacit acknowledgement of Grace's confused hostility gave her pause. Her newfound edginess around him was as welcome as tick-borne disease in her cows and shredded the good manners her parents had taught her. Tessa would love a dog, Ella murmured. The oh no in her sister's voice had Grace hiding a grin. Maybe not yet. Ella rubbed Kit's back. Tess, say hello to Ryan and he might introduce you. Tessa lifted her head, tilted it further back and giggling toppled back against Grace. Hello, big man. He hunkered down and slid a hand over the dog's head, caressing one ear while encouraging the brown and white mutt to sit. His tongue lolled out the side of his mouth and his liquid brown eyes adoringly followed Ryan's every move. Hi, Tessa. This is Satan. Ryan introduced his companion. Figures. Grace wished she could see through those glasses, see if there was any hint of apology in Ryan's eyes. A Melcher bones brown. Not that she'd paid much attention to him years ago on the school bus. He'd been in Ella's class, whereas his younger brother Danny had been in Grace's. The brothers had shared the same dark brown hair and eyes, the same rangy build. The stab of grief for Danny ambushed her, one of the reasons she'd kept her distance since Ryan's return. How'd the dog get his name? Grace snatched at the conversational lifeline. Fought through hellfire to save a few lives, or his namesake from World War I did. This one alerted us to a fire in a cabin. Didn't you, boy? Ryan crooned. We got the workers out safely, but his leg was badly burned. Had to amputate. He'd wrong-footed her again by showing a sensitive side. Poor baby. Grace stretched out a hand to the dog and waited until he accepted it before patting him. Like this, Tess. He's very gentle, likes kids. Ryan's hand covered Tessa's, bringing him closer to Grace. Close enough for her to smell man and shared history. Her breath caught in her throat as past and present collided. Good doggy. Ellie, Tessa screwed up her eyes against the sun. I want doggy. I know you do, darling, Ella murmured. We can talk about it with Jake. She looks like Chrissy. Ryan lowered his voice so only Grace could hear. When she nodded, he continued. I'm sorry Chrissy died. I haven't had the chance to tell you. I'm sorry about Dan. Old despair erupted in a messy accusation. You never gave me a chance to tell you. Ella winced at her sharp response. But Grace had looked to Ryan in the church 10 years ago for help to make sense of the madness, for reassurance, to see if he shared her sense of loss, of waste, of guilt in not being able to prevent Danny's death. Ryan had refused to talk to her after Danny's funeral, abandoning her to suffocating grief. Ryan had been 17 then, her 15, as tall as now but gangly. He hadn't grown into his build, but the promise of the man had been there. His shaggy hair had been longer, not long enough to hide his tight, shuttered expression. The pain of Ryan's rejection had smouldered inside her, only to flare up now. He'd left town straight after her best friend Danny's funeral. Hadn't stayed for the wake or to listen to community condolences. Ryan had spoken to no one, not even her, then disappeared. When his mother needed him, Grace had struggled to forgive him for that too. She'd taught herself not to need him, not to need anyone other than her family. I'm sorry I didn't speak to you. He rose abruptly to his feet, his hands held up in front of him. She rose with him, her heart hammered, her hands balled and her legs were planted wide in defiance. Are these handmade? A short, wide woman in a rose-patterned dress had peeled off from the noisy pack surging through the hall and stood at her stall. Grace scurried to the counter, a plastic smile plastered in place. Yes, farmhouse cheeses from Blue Sky Farm in the Ridgeway Valley. Can I try? The woman gestured to the 2 breadboards, one spilling over with crackers and chunks of fruit bread, with a large wedge of her crumbly cheddar in central position. The second hosted her soft cheeses, a less rustic display, more a sophisticated cheese platter presented as you might a share plate at an award-winning restaurant. What would you like first? The potential customer held only half of Grace's attention, although her patter was too well honed for the woman to detect her distraction. Ryan and his giveaway nothing reflective sunglasses occupied her peripheral vision. Ella had always defended him for leaving town. Hers was an easy friendship with him, something Grace couldn't imagine for herself. Nice to catch up with you, EJ. Ryan turned to walk away. Ella caught his elbow and linked arms. Why don't you escort Tessa and me back to Jake so I can introduce you? She made a face at Grace, promising a reprimand later tonight for her churlish sniping. See you later, Grace. The cheddar? Miss Rose Patton said. Grace lost her temper when her heart couldn't make sense of her world, which only compounded her sense of helplessness. She could have, should have politely accepted Ryan's condolences for Chrissy. Instead, let her rip Gracie had ripped into him, reminding him of that dreadful day, a gut clenched in contrition. From his reaction, she'd catapulted him back to the incomprehensible hell they'd inhabited after Danny's death. Can I try the cheddar? Miss Patient Rose Patton had to repeat her choice. The woman skewered the chunk Grace cut with a toothpick, wrinkled her nose as she savoured its earthy scent, then popped it in her mouth. I like it. The woman reached for the second chunk Grace had cut. What's your average cheddar weight? About 12 kilos. Grace braced for the verdict, always personal when it was your own creation. I'll take one. I just love the branding. Pretty girls. Is that from the nursery rhyme? Miss Rose Patton leaned closer. Are you one of those 3 girls in frilly blouses sitting on a bench in the photo on your label? Grace raised her voice to compete with the booming announcement of the winning ticket for the door prize. I'm the middle sister. My nana loved that photo, called it Pretty Girls all in a row. Except now Grace had only one sister. That's sweet, Miss Rose Patton gave Grace a shrewd look. And your blouse matches the one in the photo. Clever marketing. I'm guessing Blue Sky's your farm. Family owned and run for 4 generations. When Grace took over, it would be 5. The continuity was a rhythm beating in her blood, a source of pride as well as a passion. For now, she operated as a subtenant, working and living out of the old house her grandparents had lived in until their deaths. "Was that your sister and a husband?" Miss Chatty Rose Patton stared at Ryan's retreating back, giving Grace permission to do the same. "Ella's my sister. Ryan's not Ella's husband." Relief pushed jumpy sparks of alarm along Grace's synapses. "I am not interested." "A neighbour. He's reason enough to move to the country." The woman's low-voiced chuckle brought Grace's gaze back to her. "Easy on the eye," the woman commented. "Do your sisters work in the business?" They had other dreams, unnecessary to explain her beautiful younger sister's early death from an aggressive cancer 2 years ago. Grace processed the payment, putting the cheese into one of the sturdy cloth bags she'd designed and made, and added one of her business cards. "I've given you my card," she smiled, "in case you want more. Do you need help getting this to your car?" "I'm fine, and I feel sure you'll be hearing from me." Miss Rose Patton rejoined the river of people winding through the stalls. Ryan was aware of Grace's gaze on him as he walked away. He'd planned to approach her today. They'd done enough pussyfooting around. She avoided him at those community functions where their paths crossed, but they were next-door neighbours, as well as business people in a small community, and their standoff was starting to generate gossip, enough to have his mother asking him questions. "Are you here long?" Ryan asked Ella. He'd intended to use his role as a committee member to approach the booth. EJ's arrival made it simple. He was sure of a welcome from her. Every time Grace saw him, she donned some invisible cloak of disdain to repel him, giving him the brush off without saying a word. Her outburst gave him an answer. She blamed him for a silence at the funeral, which had taken every ounce of his self-control to maintain. "A few days. There's Jake," Ella signalled, but Tessa had already taken off at a run to be caught and lifted high by a grinning pirate of a man with a ponytail and earring. "Not quite what I expected," Ryan murmured. "That was my reaction when I met him." Ella released his arm. "Jake, this is Ryan Wilson, a friend. Ryan, meet my husband." "I've heard about you." Jake offered a hand. "No need to clamour, just general stuff about how you and your brother, Eleanor and Grace, grew up together." Grace and Danny bonded as preschoolers. EJ leaned into her husband, each of them holding a child, the 4 of them a solid unit. Ties Ryan avoided. "They were close," he agreed, and despite having different dreams, stayed close. He rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe their dreams hadn't been so different. It required creativity as well as determination to produce unique cheeses. Danny had wanted to do graphic design, although that was one secret they'd managed to keep from the small-minded, small-town busybodies who dismissed the creative arts as unmanly. "Mum used to say they were joined at the hip." EJ faced the truth head-on. Grace adored Dan. Grace had shouted at Ryan at Danny's funeral, although he hadn't heard a word past the roaring in his ears. He'd seen her mouth moving, her arms waving, and hot tears pouring unchecked down her cheeks. If he tried to speak, he would have shouted too, not at her, at the sanctimonious school principal who'd expelled Danny for sharing a kiss, and the bigots who'd taunted Danny. Shouting at the cowards who'd driven his brother to suicide would have turned to fighting. Ryan had wanted to beat the shit out of someone that day, but he'd clamped it down for Danny, for his gentle brother Danny. Then Ryan had got the hell out, planned never to return. "I know." His powerlessness was another regret. He hadn't been able to find any words for her. He'd let Grace down too. More casual small talk, an easy goodbye, EJ or Ellen or Jane, too big a mouthful for school days, made things easy for him, with Jake and with Grace. A natural mediator, EJ had waded into the middle of a fight, even when they'd shared a classroom. Not a close friend, but a mate. He rolled his shoulders and Satan pushed his nose into Ryan's hand. Animals were more reliable than most people, but a trusty dog couldn't shift this kind of tension. Grace had run free at his place as a kid, even when she was a bit more than a kid. He'd liked her loyalty to Danny even more, but he'd never given her a second look. Today's kick to his libido had been unforeseen and irritated the hell out of him, given she treated him as if he had some contagious disease. The contrast between the virginal white lace blouse and her usual work shirts had his head spinning. It softened her hard edges, made his fingers itch to unwrap this unexpected delight. Turns out her normal plain packaging was camouflage, useful for projecting a no-nonsense persona in the still largely masculine farming world. Up close, Grace Anderson wasn't all cool businesswoman. Jeans and boots were standard. The flimsy white cotton with lace and frills caressing her breasts and gathered at the waist told a different tale. It matched the photo of the little girls on her label. A sentimental streak. Danny always swore she had a marshmallow centre beneath the quick temper, but that was a lifetime ago. Her wide-brimmed hat had lain discarded on a box behind her, and her sunglasses had been tossed aside when Ryan had arrived. Her clear green gaze had bored unflinchingly into his shades when she'd slapped him down. Confident, right enough, mixed with a hint of vulnerability to twist his gut. Danny would have responded to her sensitivity, although even at 15, he'd been oblivious to the appeal of her soft scent, cluster of brown curls, not quite pretty face and firm body. And Danny, or rather his brother's death, stood between Grace and himself. There's a bit.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, such a great story. Before I ask you about this, I have to say you have a great turn of phrase gift. I love listening to the way you knit words together. It's just fabulous.
Thank you very much.
So much. What a great story. Oh my gosh. Okay, so tell me about the cheese research that you had to do for this book.
Oh, well,
I'm a little bit of a mouse, so.
Okay, well, the cheese research wasn't the biggest part. The cheese research I did into weights of cheeses, types of cheeses, and there are quite a few artisan cheeses in Australia and quite a few farmers. I'm sure this is the same in the States, but farmers turning to sidelines in their business to help the income turn around.
Absolutely.
The biggest research was succession and inheritance planning for farms.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that little hole was like.
Well, we have a problem in Australia. I don't know if you have it in the States, but where it's often not talked about, but it's expected that one child will perhaps take on the farm and will support one child.
Yeah.
And they work often for a slightly less than award wage, with the expectation of helping the whole, taking over the farm. But then the parents die and the other kids say, what about my share?
Okay.
We've actually had in Australia some quite dramatic stories of families being sold, huge disputes about settlements because there was no conversation ever about how do you actually share what is succession and what is inheritance and how do you manage it. So I found that fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Here we have a thing called probate, that if there isn't a will written, then you have to go through this whole long legal process to figure out who owns what.
We
but
do have that.
the idea of succession, that's a new idea to me. I don't hear a lot about that here, but I'm not in the farming community, so that could be
Yeah,
something that happens.
The very, well, another strange and related thing was that while I was doing this research, and I'd gone through heaps of sort of legal papers, and I was looking at lawyers who handled these kinds of disputes, I was summoned to jury duty.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I went through the entire process of answering all the questions, doing various things, and I was picked in the final 12. So they then cleared the court, and they then started giving us a bit more detail. And there was an inheritance farmland issue in the
my
court.
gosh.
So I had to
you end up recusing yourself?
I had to put up my hand and explain to the judge that I was a romance writer, which was pretty mortifying, and that I was researching succession and inheritance and disputes between family over farm properties.
And were you excused?
No, he asked me to bring in the following morning a documented history of all of the research that I'd been doing.
Oh my goodness.
Questions, and I said I knew nothing about this case. It was general research, nothing about this dispute. I'd never heard of this dispute. And so he insisted that I bring in all of this information, and they checked it and they allowed me to remain.
Oh my goodness. So did any of that get into the story? Did any of that
No,
because
we don't go to court in this particular story. No.
Okay. All right. What an adventure. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this book coming out. It is brand new. And as of our taping today, it hasn't yet seen the light of day. So I'm excited to see that happen.
No, it's going to be out in time for Valentine's Day, 7th of Feb.
So you can be certain that my name will be on that pre-order list. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm so glad that we again got to share some story together.
I'd love to do it again.
I would love to have you back. You have a wonderful night or day or...
No, it's the middle of the day here.
Oh my gosh. Crazy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.